Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Roommate. Linda Chase is a woman who lived quite an isolated life and didn't really see or speak to many people aside from her longtime friend and roommate Charles Ziegler. In 2010, Charles, who was in his 60s, ended up passing away from natural causes. Definitely a sad situation, but as is the circle of life, but rather than calling the proper people after Charles' death, Linda did nothing. Well, she put him in a chair and kept him there for the next 18 months. Linda decided she wanted to live with a corpse. Apparently she enjoyed the company and would speak to his remains while she watched NASCAR. In the end, Linda was also cashing his social security checks, which is both suspicious and fraud, and I believe that's actually how she was found out and caught. She swears that she didn't keep the body just for the checks, but rather because she didn't want to be alone, and while that is terribly sad, the jury is still out on that one.
Moving on to number 9, we have What's on Your Mind. First off, shout out to the old hairstyles, glasses, and outfits. This must have been taken in the 70s. I mean, back then, this was probably a very cool artistic photo. But nowadays, it makes you wonder, why? Just why? Maybe it's symbolic, you know? Like, the father has got his family constantly on his mind. That's a sweet message. But it also almost looks like a funeral card. Coming in at number 8, we have Creepy Santa. What is going on with Santa in this picture? I guess this is a mask that the guy is wearing, but it's not jolly at all. No, he looks like a serial killer. No one should be brought near this Santa. He'll just scoop the kids in a bag and then take them off to hell or something. And that's probably why the kids look so frightened in the photo. They had to stand next to this creepy guy. Honestly, one look at this guy and I would have ran out of the room. Like, that's not Santa, that's my sleep paralysis demon. Seriously, where did they find this costume? The Halloween store? In our 7th spot, we have post-mortem photography. Back in the day, it was a trend for family members to take photos with their deceased relatives or loved ones. So photographers would prop the dead bodies up or display them so they kind of looked alive. And then family members would pose around them. This is what's happening in this photo. The individual on the floor sadly has passed away. Now what's creepy is that half of the family is smiling like nothing happened, whereas the other half look like they're in pain or just uncomfortable. Honestly, it's the fact that people are smiling around the dead body that creeps me out. Now, why did people do this back then? Well, for a number of reasons. First, it was a way to deal with their grief. Second, it helped preserve the image of the loved one that passed away. And third, it was like a little memento. This trend became common in Victorian England when there was a rise of short lifespans for the young, which is really sad. Moving on to number 6, we have these superheroes. So you know when you're growing up and you're all like, my mom and dad are my heroes. Well, this is certainly not what this kid meant by that. So I'm not gonna lie, the Superman and Wonder Woman costumes are actually really well done, minus the fact that Superman's logo is upside down. Hey, maybe he just didn't want to get copyrighted or something. But still, they look good. And then we have Spider-Man. You can tell by the expression on the kid's face that he is not comfortable with whatever is behind him, because that's not Spider-Man. More like, Spider-Man, this kid ain't going home, he's coming home with me. Also, smash that like button if you've seen the new Spider-Man movie. No spoilers, but let me know in the comments below if you liked it. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the inappropriate Christmas family photo. Take a look at this photo. How incredibly inappropriate and creepy. Like, you got the dad calling his 2 daughters hoes. I mean, it's a little funny, but it's very creepy. Like, whose idea was this? Also, what is that man doing with his wife's head? He's got like a claw hand on top of her. Is he trying to like hold her down? Also, no one in the photo looks like they're really enjoying this photo shoot. So I'll ask this again. Whose idea was this? I'd be mortified if I got this in the mail from any of my relatives. In our 4th spot, we have the ornaments. Whoever thought this next photo was a good idea needs to be fired. So this family went in for a cute Christmas photo shoot and then got edited as Christmas ornaments. Not gonna lie though, they all seem pretty happy, so maybe this is what they wanted. Like, it's kind of cute, but also they kind of look like Oompa Loompas. I bet this family looks back at this photo and they're like, what were we thinking? It's definitely coming back to haunt them. Like, people could use this photo as blackmail. I'm just kidding. It's not that bad compared to others on this list. It's more just like tacky than anything. Moving on to number 3, we have dad's legs. Whoever posed this family in the photo needs to be fired. They literally were like, okay, let's have you hugging your parents, and let's have the two oldest boys sitting cross-legged on the floor hugging their parents' legs. Yes, perfect, it looks great. Really captures their innocence. No, it's a little creepy, if you ask me. Like, the matching outfits are bad enough. The pose just pushes it over the top. It's actually hilarious. Like, look at the dad's Superman pose. He's so proud. Like, yeah, this is my family. So, regardless of the cringe factor, it kinda is cute. Just not a photo you should have framed and hanging in your home. Coming in at number 2, we have the... I honestly don't even know what to name this one. Just take a look. I don't know. They look like a lotus flower or something. Anyways, how the photographer managed to keep a straight face as the family stacked on top of each other and just spread their legs wide open is beyond me. But at the same time, it's impressive. Like, look how flexible they all are. Also, it's pretty trippy. Like, whose arms are whose? Whose legs are whose? It's a little mesmerizing, you know? Like, the longer you look at it, the more you get intrigued. But I bet that baby is haunted by this photo now. And in our number 1 spot today, we have What the Heck Is This? And I gave this point that name because when I saw the photos, I literally said, what the heck is this? So 4 years ago, Pam Zaring and her family got some photos done. They hired a photographer who claimed to be a professional, and she charged them $250 for a family photo shoot. And this is what they were given. Pam and her family actually found these photos so hilarious that she actually tweeted them out, and they went viral. She said, and I quote, "This is not a joke. We paid a photographer who claimed to be a professional $2 to $250 for a family photo shoot. Please see these for real photos she delivered to us. She said the shadows were really bad on the beautiful, clear, sunny day, and that her professor never taught her to retouch photos. Feel free to share. I literally have not laughed this hard in years. You can't make this stuff up." End of quote. Again, these photos were not a joke. They were the final product. And honestly, the shadows on the face were probably better than her removing their face completely and then making them look like aliens. Like, I can't believe the photographer really edited these and thought, perfect, much better. Yeah.
Jumping straight on in at number 10, we have the Carson family. Meet the Carsons, parents to 18 children in California. Christy and Dave have been at it for years, literally. Their eldest is 27 and their youngest is still a toddler. The pair have said that religion isn't a factor in their family, they've just never felt that it was complete. The pair have been married for over 26 years and they're probably done having kids now. Good on them.
Number 9. This scary family secret comes from Reddit. Apparently this person had an uncle in prison, but no one in her family ever told her what he was serving time for. The family never talked about him, and if he was brought up in conversation, everyone would just simply change the topic. But one night, she was watching a TV documentary about horrific crimes that happened in Perth, Australia. And guess what? One of them was about David and Catherine Burney and how they brutally murdered a call girl. Well, as it turns out, this guy had the exact same name as her uncle in prison. Could this be the same guy? Could this be your uncle? Well, she turned to her mom, who said, "So I guess you could put the two to two together." Well, I guess that's one way to find out that you have an uncle who murdered someone. Not the best way of finding out, but yeah. The murderous couple is in at number 8. Gerald and Alice Uden appear to be the most wholesome couple. They regularly attended church and they seem to be super nice, genuine, they're very generous people. Well, don't be fooled by them because both of them were hiding their own deep, dark secret for decades. Apparently they were both married to other people they met before. Alice shot her husband in the head and then decided to hide his body in a gold mine. Whereas Gerald confessed to shooting his ex-wife and stepchildren with a rifle that she had bought him as a present. I mean, is this real life right now? What are the odds of these two people finding each other? Did they meet at a Killed My Spouse group meeting, or maybe they swiped right on the Kill Me app or I've Killed Before app? It's also crazy how many years went by before they were finally caught by the police. This story is absolutely insane. Next up on our list at number 7, antifreeze. A mother and daughter confessed to poisoning members of their family with antifreeze. Let me give you guys a quick backstory. The father died without warning, so they attributed it to natural causes. Well, 5 months later, her autistic son died from what seemed to be seizure-related complications. And then the following year after that, her daughter needed emergency medical attention, and this is for an organ failure. Yeah, something about this just doesn't seem right. The family's pastor thought so too, so he reached out to local law enforcement who were able to get a confession out of her. And her motives were pretty messed up. She wanted her husband gone because of his temper, she couldn't deal with her autistic son, and her daughter racked up too much debt from college. So she had to go as well. She was gonna keep her other 2 daughters because she so loved them. But get this, the police found a diary belonging to her youngest daughter, and she wrote about how she helped her mother plan and execute the murders, and her goal was to eliminate the entire family until it was just her and her mother left. I mean, I can't even deal with this messed up family, so let's move on. The closet child comes in at number 6. For 3 years, a young boy was hidden inside of a locked closet while he was sedated by sleeping pills given to him by his mother. When neighbors asked Veronica Aguilar where her son was, she told them that he was placed in an institution in Mexico. But her 3 other children who slept on a bed just outside of the closet door knew the truth, but they were forbidden by their mother from saying anything to anyone. Sadly, this little boy's life came to an end when police finally discovered his malnourished body inside of the closet. It's insane because so many people like teachers, social workers, therapists, they all knew that he was a victim of abuse, but somehow they lost track of him, and because of their carelessness, his mother was able to lock him inside of a closet for a very long time until he ultimately passed away. Number 5, we have a crazy story about a girl who was raised by a man who killed her parents. Victoria Montenegro thought that her adoptive parents were kind and generous people who took her in after her real parents were killed in a shootout in Buenos Aires in 1976. Well, as it turns out, that was a complete lie. When she turned 24 years old, she discovered that the couple who raised her was part of the military regime responsible for her parents' disappearance. Her birth parents were actually abducted, abused, and assassinated by this group when she was only 4 months old. So her adoptive father took this opportunity to falsify her documents, hide her identity, and raise her as his own. This is just so messed up, so twisted. All of these years, she was being raised by a family that actually killed her parents and stole her identity. A serial killer in hiding brings us to number 4. Back in 1971, 13-year-old Charlie Brandt went into a full homicidal rampage. Without any warning, he shot his father in the back and then shot his pregnant mother while she was in the bath. He went to kill his other sister, but luckily his gun jammed. His father barely survived the shooting, but his mother wasn't so lucky. But because of his age, prosecutors never charged him with his mother's death. He was able to walk free and live a normal life. His family never brought up that night ever again, and he just went on as nothing ever happened. Well, in 2004, Brandt went on to brutally stab his wife 7 times in the chest, and he even decapitated her and ripped her heart out. Afterwards, he committed suicide. It's crazy because no one knew that he had serial killer tendencies except for his family, who kept his secret after all of these years. Now at number 3, dead bodies in the garage. Darren West spent 10 years of his life thinking that he only had 3 children with his ex-wife. But in 2006, this reality was shattered. He was serving time in prison for drug charges, but he was being released. While he was making arrangements to stay with his ex-wife, he came to the shocking truth. He found a dead baby in her garage, and it wasn't the only one. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman had secretly given birth to 7 babies, and she choked them all to death. She turned her garage into a makeshift graveyard and kept this family's secret for years. As it turns out, she was addicted to meth, and that was her motive for killing these poor kids. I just can't believe that she was able to hide her pregnancy and murders this whole time. She probably would have taken this dark secret to her grave. The Turpin children makes its way onto this list at number 2. David and Louise Turpin managed to abuse their 13 children for years until one daughter was able to escape and tell the police. These poor kids were in such a controlling and abusive environment and had to do whatever it took to survive. In the media, their house was being called a house of horrors because some of the children were so far removed from the world. I mean, they didn't even know what medicine or the police were until they were finally rescued. They were only fed once a day and given a shower once a year. No one in the neighborhood had any idea what was going on inside of that house, and the parents managed to get away with this for a very long time. They're able to get away with their dark secret for many, many years. Now at number 1, we have a girl who was held captive for 24 years. This next story is a pretty famous case that emerged back in 2008. A woman named Elizabeth Fritzl, well, she told police that she had been captive for the past 24 years by her own father. Joseph Fritzl had assaulted, abused, and hurt her numerous times during her, imprisonment inside of her family basement. His abuse resulted in the birth of 7 children, where 3 of them remained in captivity with Elizabeth. One of them died shortly after birth, and Joseph disposed of his body in an incinerator, and the other 3 were brought up by him and his wife as their own. This secret went on for 24 years until finally the police discovered what was really going on. The story is so much more messed up, but I definitely don't want to get into all the horrific details. All I know is that Elizabeth is finally free, and I hope that one day she'll be able to move past this. I feel so bad.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Alcatraz. For the years between 1934 to 1963, the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was open, operating, and said to house some of the worst and most ruthless prisoners in all of America. Situated in San Francisco Bay, just 1.25 miles from the mainland, Alcatraz Island became home to those in the prison as well as to the guards and their families who also lived on the island. Those who applied for jobs at the penitentiary would have to move there if they got it. Former resident Chuck Stucker explained that life on Alcatraz was similar to those who grew up on a military base. He further explained that, quote, there was a preschool on the island, a small commissary with milk, butter, bread, a post office. My dad had the first color TV on the island, and it was a real popular thing for the adults. Most evenings you were either at someone's house for dinner or they were at yours. On the other hand, however, not everything can be exactly like it is everywhere else. He went on to say, quote, for the older kids, our school bus was the boat that took us to the mainland. School administrators, they were aware of the fear that we could be held hostage to try and get an inmate off the island, so we had small dog tags. IDs that had our names in association with Alcatraz. You wore it with a small metal chain. Aside from that, Chuck remembers life on the island extremely pleasantly, with a specific mention to the gorgeous views he and his family had from their home. In our number 9 spot today, we have San Pedro. Okay, if you haven't heard of the San Pedro prison in Bolivia, do I have a story for you. This prison was made famous when a British inmate began giving tours of the prison to tourists in the early 2000s, which sounds kind of insane, but this prison is unlike any other that I've ever heard of. This prison is essentially run by the inmates, and it functions like its own little society. It's absolutely wild. It's more like a hotel than what many would consider a traditional jail. Inmates actually have to purchase their own cell, to which they get a key, and there are like nicer 5-star cells for the rich, and sometimes they even renovate them to make them nicer, but there are also smaller, more crammed cells that house more than a couple inmates. So like some cells go for $30,000 while others are just a couple hundred. So while this all may seem like a lax, fun sort of monopoly prison system, there are actually some major flaws with deadly consequences. The city in which San Pedro is built, La Paz, sits at about 3,600 meters above sea level. It's one of the highest cities in the world, and this means that at night the temperature drops rapidly, and if you're left without a cell, you might just die of exposure, as have many prisoners throughout the years. Along with the cost of a cell itself, inmates also have to pay for food, clothing, and medicine, so they need to have jobs within the prison to pay for all of this. You might be sitting there wondering what this all has to do with families that chose to stay in unsettling places, and really it's because at San Pedro, the government allows prisoners' wives and children to live with the inmates. I really did just say that. The children head off to school in the morning and return at night, and it is said that this is done so that the inmates don't lose contact with their families, and so that it can aid in their rehabilitation. The wives and children who reside at the prison are said to be treated with the utmost respect and are kept safe by all inmates, but despite that, it's of course an extremely controversial topic. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Danakil Depression. The Danakil Depression is a part of the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia, and it is a geological depression that came about as a result of Africa and Asia moving apart. The divergence of 3 tectonic plates caused rifting and volcanic activity. This place is the hottest on Earth in terms of average year-round temperatures, and it is also one of the lowest places on Earth at 100 meters below sea level. There are active volcanoes in the area, there are salt springs, Springs, Sulphur Springs, and it only gets about 4 to 8 inches of rain every year. What I'm saying is that this place is stunning, and it has an incredibly rich geological history, but it isn't very hospitable. Despite that, there are people who call this place home. The Afar people have called this area home for many years, and of course that poses the question of how? Well, the biggest industry in the Danakil Depression is salt, and many of the people who live here will mine salt with their hands and then take a 2-day camel journey into the next town to sell it. The people who live here also have to deal with an average temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, but sometimes it gets as hot as 50 degrees Celsius. Somehow they have overcome the odds and the obstacles and managed to thrive in this extreme environment, and it is said that this was made possible over the centuries by their ability to adapt to need less food and water than other humans. Honestly, it's one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard. And on number 7 spot today we have the Ramsey home. Okay, what would you say if someone told you that they bought the home where a horrific and one of the most prolific crimes of all time happened? And then what if I told you that they went to sell it years later but decided against it because they just loved the home so much? I mean, I get it, but I don't. You know? This is what happened when Timothy and Carol Schuller Milner bought the Jean-Benet Ramsey home in 2004 after it had sat vacant since the terrible crime happened in 1996. The 7,000 square foot home was built in 1926, and after their 2004 purchase, the couple tried listing and selling the home at a price point of $2.3 million in 2008, 2009, and again in 2011, and once again in 2014 at a lower price of $1.95 million. But surprisingly, no one wants to buy it. I wonder why. Now the home is unavailable for purchase, but not because it was snatched up by someone, but because Carol and Timothy turned down all the offers because they simply love the house so much. In our number 6 spot today we have La Rinconada. This town is located near the Peruvian Andes, very close to a gold mine, and is actually the highest permanent settlement in the world at 5,100 meters above sea level. Between 2001 and 2009, the population of this town increased greatly because the price of gold rose 235% during that time. Because of the elevation, the town has an alpine tundra climate and an average temperature of around 1 degree Celsius. The city has no running water or sewage, and the population of people who live here are working themselves to the bone in extremely dangerous mercury-filled mines. They're also working under some pretty horrible conditions where they work 25 days of the month for no pay at all, and then for 5 days of the month they can work for themselves and they are allowed to take as much ore as they can carry on their shoulders, but there is no guarantee that the ore will have any gold in it, and this is a terrible system, and it's why many of the town's residents live in extreme poverty. The town is a 6-hour bus ride from the nearest city on unpaved roads, and there isn't really a regular bus schedule, which makes it very difficult to get to. In our number 5 spot today we have the Yukon Wilderness. Suzanne Crocker and her husband Gerard Parson packed up their lives along with their 3 children and set off to live for 9 months in a remote cabin in the Yukon Territory here in Canada. They lived with no running water, no electricity, no internet, and not even clocks or watches. They wanted to unplug in the most dramatic way possible. Suzanne said, quote, "To get the freedom of time again, we had to free ourselves from the structure of time and see what would happen." They actually made a film about this adventure called All the Time in the World, and it begins by showing their arrival to the cabin where they have to work for days in order to transport all their food. They have to haul it up a hill to the cabin, and then they have to build a food shed on stilts to prevent bears from reaching it. When the temperatures plunged to minus 50 degrees Celsius and the nearby river froze solid, they described it as liberating, being able to skate, ski, and snowshoe freely. The coldest days they had a bit of cabin fever, but in the film, one of the children, Kate, makes a very beautiful point as to why, when the 8-year-old explains that, quote, "Inside is our storage place, but outside is actually our home." Half the days were spent preparing food, as quite literally everything needed to be made from scratch, of course, and all of this was only possible because both Suzanne and Gerard clearly had extensive knowledge of life in the wild. While this was certainly not an easy mission, there are definitely more unsettling places on this list, and as it turns out, this 9-month-long adventure turned out quite beautifully. In our number 4 spot today, we have Volcanic Island. This is one that is very different from the others on this list, but it was just so incredibly interesting we have to talk about it. Back in 1965, Mano Tatau and 5 of his friends were studying at a boarding school in Tonga when they decided to do something quite rebellious, and that was to steal a traditional whaling boat and set off for Fiji. There are of course several flaws with this plan, but boys are boys, and they stole this engineless boat that had no map or compass, despite their destination being about 500 miles away. On the first night of this trip, a terrible storm ripped off the sails from the mast and tore off the boat's rudder, and for the next week the ship drifted aimlessly until the teens were able to struggle ashore to a volcanic island that they were able to spot. They were on the island of Ada and now had to learn how to survive. While many would expect some sort of Lord of the Flies situation, it was anything but that. The boys worked together to keep each other and themselves alive. Until they could build a fire, they ate raw fish. They would drink the blood and eggs of seabirds to keep their thirst quenched, and at one point they were able to find a clay pot, a machete, and some chickens that were left over from a small Tongan community that had lived here before. I could go on about this story forever, but in the end the boys lived quite harmoniously for 15 months while they were stranded on this island before they were rescued and brought back home, much to the astonishment of their families who had been grieving them for the last year. Despite how long it's been, many of the boys, who are of course now men, remain friends and sometimes even sail together. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Versace Mansion. This place is an American property that was built in 1930 and is well known for being owned by Italian fashion designer Gianni Versace, as well as the place where Andrew Cunanan took Gianni's life. This 19,000 square foot Miami Beach home was bought by Gianni for $2.95 million in 1992, and in 1993 he also bought the adjoining Revere Hotel for $3.7 million, which he tore down to make the pool and garden area for his home. On July 15, 1997, Gianni was sadly shot by Andrew at the front of his home, and to this day, no one really knows why. Of course, when a tragedy occurs in a home like this one, it isn't exactly easy to sell after. In 2000, however, that all changed when Peter Lofton purchased the home for $19 million. Instead of using it for his own personal enjoyment, he decided to use the property as a boutique hotel, restaurant, and luxury event space. After that, in 2003, the mansion was bought by VM South Beach LLC for $41.5 million, and since then they have been using it as a luxury hotel with 10 unique suites. So yeah, not just one family is staying here, just a bunch of different rich ones are. In our number 2 spot today, we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. This is a door to hell that is located in Pennsylvania underneath the cracked asphalt of one of the town's streets. Under these streets is an underground coal mine fire that was first set ablaze in 1962, and it just may continue burning for another couple hundred years, or maybe forever if it really is the entrance to hell. It is unknown exactly how the fire was first started, which is the topic of many arguments, but it quickly burned through all of the old networks of shafts and tunnels. After the fire started, sinkholes began to appear all over, and steam plumes, which were full of lethal amounts of carbon monoxide, began to rise from the ground. People started to compare what was going on underneath the city to what hell must be like, thus the Door to Hell name. Once 1984 rolled around, the government began urging people to leave the city and even claimed to help with the relocating costs, but as of 2013 there were 8 residents who refused to leave, and they ended up settling a lawsuit that included a $349,500 settlement and the right to reside in the town until the end of their lives. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Dahmer home. Jeffrey Dahmer is of course one of the most terrifying and prolific serial killers ever, which is exactly why it doesn't come as a surprise that his home, the one where some of his very first crimes were carried out, was a bit of a tough sell. Yeah, turns out most people don't want it. How strange. PETA was going to use the property to convert it into a vegan restaurant, but because of zoning issues, that never happened, so they needed to look for someone else to purchase the property instead, and that ended up being Chris Butler, the rock musician from Waitresses. According to Chris, when he first viewed the home, he had no idea the dark history behind it. He was really intrigued in it because it is surrounded by woods, and as a rock musician, looking for somewhere you can make as much noise as you want without bothering anybody is ideal, but when you think of a serial killer owning it prior, that thought immediately gives you the shivers. In the end, he says he went with the house because he really liked it, and it's not like it's the house's fault for the atrocities Jeffrey committed, which I mean, is fair. He also doesn't believe in ghosts, so he doesn't worry on that front. According to him, the only thing he really worries about in the home is all the people stopping by who want a tour like they're entitled to it.
Starting off this countdown, we have the ventriloquist doll. I don't know about you, but some dolls freak me out, like this one. This picture is the definition of creepy. Who said it was okay for that girl to bring her doll for the family photo? Or maybe that's their brother that got cursed and got transformed into a dummy. Or their brother wasn't available for the family photo, so they decided to make a lifelike doll of him, to take his place. Or the doll is haunted and is possessing their family. There's just too many options here, I swear, this is how dolls become haunted though. You start treating them like family, and next thing you know, a soul inhabits it. Didn't that happen to the famous haunted doll, Robert? Anyways, this picture would have been better off with just the girls and their little cat and dog. There was no need for the puppet doll as well.
Coming in at number 9, we have the Lawrence family. Andrew and Livia Lawrence made 18 babies in 23 years, which, wow. The couple live in British Columbia and have the joint biggest family in Canada. Their eldest is 32 years old and their youngest will turn 10 in 2018, which is quite the age span. The tight-knit family can fill 2 minivans and are quite religious. Alex and Livia, whose children all come from single births, consider their family to be a blessing from God. Coming in at number 8, we have the Kromik family. Valentina and Anatoly Kromik from the Lev-Tovsky area in Russia have 20 children, 2 of which died in infancy and 2 in childhood. Their youngest is currently 24 and their eldest is 48. They also have 10 grandchildren. Their family is quite private, so there aren't very many pictures of them, but they're out there and their Christmases must be epic. Coming in at number 7, we have the Radford family. Noel and Sue were childhood sweethearts when Sue fell pregnant at just 14 years old. Since then, the pair have had 19 children and she's pregnant with her 20th. The pair from Morecambe in the UK were featured on the British TV show 16 Kids and Counting. They own a family-run pie shop, Radford's Pies, and they must need a huge pie to feed their family. The couple married when they were 17 and have 9 girls and 9 boys, with the 10th coming sometime in 2017. Unfortunately, one of their children, Alfie, was stillborn in 2014. The couple also have 3 grandchildren who are the same age or younger than their 4 most recent aunts and uncles. The family is the biggest in all of Britain. Coming in at number 6, we have the Duggar family. Featured on America's TV show 19 Kids and Counting, Michelle Duggar and partner Jim Bob have just welcomed their 20th child, although this time they didn't actually give birth to him. They adopted their 8-year-old nephew Tyler. Now Tyler is the only one of their children not to have a name beginning with J. The rest have names like Jonah, Joanna, and Ginger with a J. The family, who live in Little Rock, Arkansas, allow their children's numbers to be determined by God. Their eldest biological child is 7, but Michelle also delivered a stillborn child in 2011. The pair have 9 grandchildren between them and counting. Coming in at number 5, we have Miriam Napatanzi. By age 37, Miriam had birthed a whopping 38 babies. Can you imagine? I mean, for me, oh no. The Ugandan mother has 4 sets of triplets, 3 sets of quadruplets, and 6 twins amongst her horde. She was married off age 12 to a 40-year-old man and had her first child age 13. Her husband is thought to have children with other women too, disappearing for most of the year and returning to procreate. What a guy. Miriam has 10 girls and 28 boys. Her youngest are babies and her eldest are nearing 24 years old. She's actually widely considered to be the most fertile woman in Uganda and is very happy to live and raise her children. So on this list so far have been monogamous families and their children, being the product of 2 parents. Beyond this point though, families are polyamorous, which of course makes it much easier for a man to sow his wild seed. It takes him a few minutes, if you're lucky, whereas a woman's job isn't over for 9 months. Coming in at number 4, we have the Luiz Costa Oliveira family. A Brazilian man called Luiz fathered 50 children with 4 women, 2 of which gave him 17 children each, and 1 which gave him 15. He also had a cheeky one with an older lady. Living in the northern state of Rio Grande do Norte, Luiz has admitted that he doesn't actually know some of the names of his kids, but who can blame him? He's nearing his late 90s these days. He's actually kind of a fertile miracle. He has said that he loves women, saying the best thing God made in the world was women. There was also other things made that could have helped him out in this situation that rhymes with shmomdom. Coming in at number 3, we have the Chana family. Meet Ziona Chana, a 71-year-old Indian man with 39 wives and 94 children, all living under one roof. Yep, that's right, they all live in a mansion in Baktwang village in India. Ziona is head of a religious sect which was started by his father, also called Chana. Chana is also the name of the religion, which, I mean, maybe I'm gonna start a religion and call it Felgate because my imagination is simply that strong. Ziona Chana's wife sleep in a big communal bedroom while he gets one of his very own. The youngest of his wives sleeps nearest his bedroom whilst the older are banished further away, which is pretty harsh. Ziona's wives cook, clean and prepare his baths while he basically just wanders around and has sex. Again, what a guy! Each of his wives gets to spend time with him on rotation. Yippee! Coming in at number 2, we have Dad Mohammed Mural Abdur Rahman. Yes, his first name is Dad, and he is dad to 94 children. This is all going down in the United Arab Emirates, and these come from his past 17 wives. Yes, 17 wives. His eldest is nearing 50, whilst his youngest is a baby. Now he himself is 67, so he really got a jump start on things. Dad is said to have only 4 current wives, but he would like to have 20. However, sadly for him, 4 is the current legal allowance. He would happily take on another wife as mother to his next children, but they have to be unmarried virgins, which seems like a very bizarre double standard. Dad would like to have 100 children before he dies, which, you know, rounds things off nicely. So all of the families on this list so far are currently living. However, this dad and our number 1 was so prolific that we had to mention him, even though he died in the year 1227. This guy is actually said to have fathered so many people that 0.5% of the whole world's male population are his ancestors. That's right, coming in at number 1, we have the hugely prolific Genghis Khan. Like, mate, put it away. In his 65 years on Earth, he fathered over, wait for it, 1,000 children. Some say the numbers could have been as high as 2,000. Now he officially had 11 wives, although just 1 empress. He also had many mistresses. So many. As if founding the Mongol Empire in the 1200s wasn't hard enough work, what with all that power consolidating and wars involved, but he also found time to make a town's worth of offspring. What a lad! What a fertile lad.
Starting off this dark list, and at number 10 we have The Secret Farmhouse. A 25-year-old man escaped from a farmhouse and ran to the nearest public place, which happened to be a bar. He guzzled down 5 beers, and then he asked the bartender for help. He told him that he hasn't been outside for 9 years, and he's not the only one. Dutch police were called to the scene, where they found a secret staircase behind a cupboard that led them down to the basement. Inside this secret room, they found a man and his 6 children living inside of a small confined space. Some of these kids had no idea that the other people existed. They thought that they were the only ones left on Earth, and they were waiting for the world to end. But as it turns out, someone in their family was keeping them locked up in this secret farmhouse for 9 years. Is this real life right now? The police were unable to find their mother, and they suspect that she was either the one that did this or that she is dead somewhere. An unknown uncle in prison is at.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Lutz family. Many of us are familiar with the Amityville horror house, but if you're not, basically it was a home that was built in 1927 by a young couple, John and Catherine Moynihan. They and their families lived there until 1965, when they then sold it to the DeFeos. Unfortunately, the fate this family met in the house was a horrific one, with a member of the family taking the lives of the rest. Less than a year after that terrible night, the house was relisted and on the market, and it was sitting at a low $80,000. The house was beautiful, it was big, and the Lutz family just couldn't turn down an offer like that. Despite the family knowing about the history of the house prior to their moving in, they still chose to. They got the home cleansed as soon as they moved in. They even hired a priest to do it for them, but it just wasn't enough, because after just 28 days they needed to leave after claiming to be terrorized by some sort of paranormal activity that was going on in the house. They said that they could hear banging on the walls, one of the family members was starting to hear voices, and the doors would all slam and shut on their own. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Lykov family. In 1936, a Russian family of 4 was fleeing religious persecution, and to do so, they fled into the Siberian wilderness. They took with them a few possessions and some seeds and retreated into the forest. Here they would build a series of primitive huts as they traveled through until they reached a spot they found found habitable, which was near the Mongolian border. They had no contact with the outside world and managed to be completely self-sufficient. When they originally fled into the wilderness, the family consisted of a husband and wife and their 2 children, and while out here in their new home, the couple had 2 more children, making them a family of 6. They spent their days hunting, trapping, and farming, and each year they saved their seeds in order to replant when the next season came around. One of the possessions they brought with them was a crude spinning wheel, which allowed them to turn hemp into fiber for their clothing. They ate a lot of potato patties that were mixed with hemp seeds and ground rye, and they lived like this for almost 50 years. They grew as much food as the land would allow, and they rationed carefully, but each year they grew closer and closer to starvation. As they grew closer to starving, they held a council meeting where they discussed whether or not they should save their seeds to replant or eat them all. Each year they ultimately decided to save their seeds, and one winter this cost the mother her life, which she sacrificed for her children. Until a geology team in 1978 found their home, the 2 youngest children had never even met a person outside of their family. While most of the family has since passed away, one member, the youngest daughter, as of 2019, still lives in this isolated location, where she has built herself quite a decent hut and has a herd of goats and a coop of chickens. In our number 7 spot today, we have the treehouse. Okay, this one is probably one of the least spooky on this list. It's more just unique, we'll call it. A family located in Hertfordshire, England has chosen to make their home in a custom-made treehouse that is located in the middle of the forest. I can't tell whether I love or hate this idea. The home consists of 2 separate lofts that are separated by rope bridges that weave through the trees. There's a main loft that has the things like the kitchen and the bathroom, and to exit the house there's either a ladder or a zip line that'll take you 70 meters down through thick brush and drop you right on a hiking trail. I'm not gonna lie, it looks pretty nice and it wouldn't be too bad to wake up to the sounds of nature every day, but I'm just wondering what the bugs are like up there, and I'm wondering what happens if something breaks. You know, I'm curious about sustainability in the long term. It's kind of like a fairy tale, which I love, but I have some practicality questions. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Heinzen family. If you're one of the many people who like to mindlessly scroll through TikTok, you might have come across the page of Madison Heinzen and her Rhode Island home. What's so special about this house? Well, it's the one featured in The Conjuring. Madison's parents bought the home in 2019, and she has since documented her paranormal experiences within the home. She even claims to have seen a ghost, saying, quote, "This happened last year when I was in the kitchen. I was eating dinner by myself and I saw someone run by me. I caught it by the left corner of my eye, and all I saw was a veil and a skirt, and it just vanished into thin air. This had all happened in a span of 3 seconds, and I just sat there in complete disbelief, not knowing what to do afterwards." The reason the parents bought this home, despite its very obvious and apparent paranormal history, is because they are in fact paranormal investigators, so I guess that makes a little bit more sense. In our number 5 spot today, we have the remote island. UK couple Boris and Karen von Engelbrechten decided to leave their regular lives behind and move them and their families to the tiny remote island of Fofo, which takes about 3 days to get to. The couple had previously lived in New Zealand for a while, but they decided to make the move in order to have some space from the rest of the world. I guess this place really isn't unsettling, it's just really remote, but I'm sure it's absolutely breathtaking. Upon their arrival, the couple worked with locals to help build a beachside property using materials from the island. The rainwater that falls on the island is piped in as drinking water, and the couple says they are about 60% self-sufficient as they grow their own fruits and veggies, and then they supplement that with a trip every 3 weeks to the nearest large island to get some canned food. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Ashley family. This is a family that are the only ones who live anywhere along the 400-kilometer length of the Nowitna River in Alaska. The family has been living here for the last 18 years, despite the location being 160 kilometers from the nearest town. Once a year, the family will travel to do a massive grocery shop for cans of produce and evaporated milk, tomato paste, rice, beans, sugar, you know, those sorts of things. But aside from this food that they buy, the family lives off of the land, hunting black bears, wolves, rabbits, ducks, and beavers, and they make jam out of rose hips and berries. The family keeps track of time in their own way, changing their clocks based on the sun and daylight hours and what season it is. They also used solar power in order to power their home. While the transition into this remote lifestyle was a little worrisome at first, the isolation is now something they embrace. They say, quote, "People want to know what 18 years of isolation does to you. It changes you. You have time to have more than 2 thoughts on any one subject. We spend months talking about just one subject because we have time to." In our number 3 spot today, we have the isolated island. For 30 years, this family has been living alone on an island in the middle of a lake in southern Dong Nay province in Vietnam. This 4-hectare island is home to Nguyen Van Long and his family, and it became their home in the 1980s when he and his wife decided to leave their hometown and move to start a new life. They began to earn a living by sawing down trees, and they then later switched to growing corn and beans and rice. When they moved here, this place actually wasn't an island at first, but became one when the lake was created. From here, the growing of the crops got more difficult. Despite the isolation and the lack of electricity, the family stays here because they explain that life would be more difficult if they moved to another place without any money. The family studied the new island soil and realized that growing cashews might be their best source of income, which it now is. In the end, he said that he is now used to living on the island and enjoys it there since it has fresh air and is away from the hustle and bustle. He goes on to explain that their children are grown now, and now that they have their own lives, he and his wife want to stay on the island forever. In our number 2 spot today, we have the bunker. This is one of the most insane and truly messed up stories I've ever heard, and I don't know where to begin. Basically, in a remote village in the Netherlands, a few years ago it was discovered that there was a family of 8 that was living in a bunker for 9 years, awaiting what they said to be the end of time. Basically, this family group consisted of a father, 6 adults who he claimed to be his children, and then another adult tenant. The oldest child managed to escape the bunker, and he headed to a local bar where he told the owner what he had just experienced and explained that he and his siblings needed help. This is what led to charges for Gerrit Jan van Dorsten, who was the supposed father, as well as for Josef Brunner, who was the tenant. Preliminary investigation revealed that the adult children were made to believe that they were the last humans on Earth. In the end, Gerrit committed numerous unbelievable and horrific crimes and was charged with a multitude of them. Just last year, however, he was deemed unfit to stand trial, and it's not exactly clear where things will go from here. It's also apparently divided the children, as the oldest 4 were in support of the arrest, with the youngest 2 being against it. All in all, this is just a horrible situation, and I feel terribly for the ones involved. In our number 1 spot today, we have Esther Sturmer. In 1941, Esther Sturmer was living in a little Ukrainian village with her 6 children. They were one of the few Jewish families who lived in the village until late that year when Nazi forces came. Esther, along with her family and 36 of the other Jewish people from her village, were able to escape, and they then spent nearly a year and a half living underground in pitch black in 2 vast caves. The group found these deep underground caves that run for miles, and they lived down there for 500 days in total darkness, but they later said that for them, the caves provided them the freedom they were robbed of during the war. 2 of Esther's children 70 years later spoke about the entire thing and said, quote, "We had a very smart mother. If I wouldn't have had this type of mother, I wouldn't be alive." They also said, quote, "You went to sleep and you had a pillow and you covered up with good blankets. What else you want? You were in paradise." The families would forage for food at night, they built showers and latrines underground, and they lived like this until April of 1944 when the Russian army liberated the area and the 5 families were able to come back into the light of day. They survived, and the 2 sons said, "We were just happy to survive. Then life started to turn normal, and that's it. We tried to get ahead. We tried to survive after the war."